welcome back to the channel. The next thing we're going to work on is the valve block. So there's a valve block in the center, and then there's an intake valve block and an exhaust valve block. So the intake and exhaust valve block are identical, except for one of them gets through holes drilled in it and the other one actually gets tapped for these 256 screws. And then the valve block in the middle gets a hole drilled through it as well. So the first thing we're going to do is actually super glue all three of these pieces together. That'll make it the easiest to get the holes drilled in it. So then we will drill clearance holes through the top two, and then we'll drill for tap drill size through the bottom. We'll drill the whole thing first for tap drill size, and then drill the clearance holes through the top two so we can get them bolted together. Then we can take them apart and drill a hole through this for the valve guide for the intake. Same thing for the exhaust. And then the center valve block gets a smaller hole drilled through it, and then it actually gets a hole drilled through here, which is where, when it mounts on the side here, that's where the fuel and air will actually enter into the cylinder. Then it gets two holes drilled here that's used to bolt it on. So we'll get this set up, get it super glued together, and then get it set up and start drilling the holes. Okay, so we got all the holes drilled in that. This is the intake block. So it gets clearance holes here for the screws. Then it gets a hole in the middle, and then it gets counterboard there, 3/8. This is the middle section, which gets holes through here to mount to the side here of the frame. Gets a straight hole through the middle. Then it gets a 188 thousandths hole drilled in the back. and then clearance holes for the screws. So the air and fuel will come in here, go through this hole into the cylinder, then the exhaust will come back through this hole and then down out through the exhaust. So this is the exhaust piece, but it gets tapped for 256 screws. It's the same hole and then the same counter bore. And then I've cleaned these up with a piece of 400 grit sandpaper on a parallel, trying to smooth them out because this is going to seal, preferably with no sealer. So then the three pieces will stack together. And then get bolted together. And then this, we've drilled and tapped the holes in the side here. So this will get bolted on to the side, just like that. So these two outer holes were drilled and tapped, and then the center hole was drilled all the way through. And then it was drilled while the cylinder was in place. But then before I drilled that hole, I went ahead and made the copper head gasket that it calls for, because that will move the cylinder back just a little bit. So I wanted it back in position when I drilled this hole. And then once you drill the hole, you actually cut it out and make a slot. So the gasket will go on here. And I made a notch here to indicate the bottom so that I knew which way to put it in. And this will get bolted back in place, and this will get bolted on the side. So one thing that I do want to cover too, if you are following along on the plans and from the last video where we made this rocker arm, I did notice afterwards that I did machine this rocker arm wrong. This relief in here is supposed to be on the other side. And then I said to start with a 250 wide piece, but after looking at the drawing, you actually need to start with a piece wider than that, because this tappet here is not in the center of this 250. Originally it's supposed to be offset 63 thousandths. So in order to make this work, I actually put my cam gear in cam. I actually flipped it around, and instead of putting the cam on the back side, I have my cam on the front side. And I moved the gears back so that I had clearance. So if you're building yours per the plans, your cam gear and cam are going to be flipped around on the other side of the rocker arm, and then this relief is going to be on the back side instead of the front side. And then my spacer here ended up being a little bit longer so that I could get this tappet in the center of the exhaust valve, which the way the original plans call for, the tappet, the center line of this is actually just a little bit in. It probably needs a little bit more than that 63 thousandths offset to line it up. So I just made this spacer to try to line it up as close as I could. It should be 5/16 off of this surface to the center of that. But I kind of like the way that this did turn out, because then you can actually see the cam on the front side. But either way, that should be flipped if you're following the plans. So the next thing we need to do is make the valve guides. And these valve guides, I'm going to make them out of brass. So I've got a solid piece of brass here to start with. And they get pressed and Loctited into the intake and the exhaust block. It has a 3/8 diameter and a 31 thousandth shoulder on it that goes in that shoulder, that recess that we machined. So once those are in place, then we still got to drill one more hole through here all the way through the guide on both the intake and the exhaust. So this will be for the carburetor to attach to, and this will be for the exhaust pipe to attach to. So we're going to set that up in the lathe and get it turned out. And then I have a tool that I'm going to use that we'll discuss here in a second to cut the valve seats. But if you are not cutting the valve seats with the tool that I have and you're going to cut them into the lathe, then I would cut them at the same time in the same setup as you drill the hole for the valve, so that ensures that they're concentric, that the seats are concentric. So the tool that I've made looks like this, and it's machined on a 45-degree angle, and then it's relieved on the sides, and then there's a relief angle machined on it. So it puts a cutting edge here and a cutting edge here on this side, and then it's got a pilot, and this pilot is 93 thousandths, so this will fit into our valve guide. And then we'll actually just turn this by hand and we'll cut the seat. So this is the tool that I used. I'll show you the plans here, and you can pause this if you want to make one of your own. This was on the Webster engine that I built, the vertical single engine. If you haven't seen that, you can go back in the playlist and watch that video. So you make the tool, and I made it out of drill rod, and then you harden it. It would probably cut okay not being hardened, but for longer life I went ahead and hardened it. So this is what we're going to use to cut the valve seats. So we will machine out everything on this valve guide except for the seats. So we'll go ahead and machine the taper here and the OD and the lip, and then machine this out all the way through it for the valve, and then counterbore this. But then once we get it installed into the valve block, then we will go back and cut the seats. So let's get this set up in the lathe and start machining. Okay, so we got the valve guides Loctited in, and we got the hole drilled for the intake and for the exhaust, drilled through the valve guide. So the next thing we're going to do is cut the seat in here with our tool that we made, and so that we can see what we're doing, we're going to put a little Sharpie on this. So the seat's supposed to be 15 thousandths wide, which is going to be hard to measure. But we can, with this Sharpie on here, we can see the witness marks, see the cut, kind of get an idea and approximate 15 thousandths. So I'll let that dry for a second. Give it a little shot of air. So we're going to take our tool here, and then we're just going to turn it by hand. So we're going to insert it in here. And it's pretty sharp, so it should start cutting, and I can see some chips. So that's probably right at about 15 thousandths. We can always go a little deeper if we need to. We will be lapping the valves into this. But I'm going to stop there on that one. Then we'll do the other one. Doesn't take much. Like I say, the tool is pretty sharp. This brass cuts real easy. Yeah, I think we're good on that one. So doing it that way, like I say, with this tool, it's a piece of drill rod that was drilled with this pallet. That helps keep it concentric to the center of the guide. And it gives you a good smooth cut. And doing it by hand like that, if you do it on a lathe, which I've tried in the past, it works with a 45-degree cutter, but you risk getting a little bit of, you can get chatter if you're not real careful, because brass is real grabby when you cut it, so it can chatter and leave some marks in there. But we need that really smooth in order to get a good seal on the valves. So that looks good. That's going to do it for this episode. Next time we will start machining the actual valves and the retainers, and then we will be winding the springs for the intake and the exhaust. They are different thicknesses, heavier spring on the exhaust. So thanks for watching, and see you next time.